Hey guys, Tony here, bringing you to my presentation for Kin 552 BE. And for this presentation, I'm going to be talking to you guys how motivation and success actually applies to track and field, in this particular group, throwers. So the reason why I chose this group is because of the diversity that's actually involved within the sport. People coming in from different places, different other sports like football, basketball, volleyball, coming in to compete within the sport. So then we have to ask, what are their goals for the sport exactly? Is it to be well coordinated and moving fast for football and soccer? Is it to be able to jump high for volleyball and basketball? Every athlete is pretty much different in terms of how they actually make their approach and about pretty much setting up different goals about how they actually want to be able to achieve what they want to achieve. So, which is why I'm going to be talking more about like goal settings and motivation, which heavily apply to the sport because, as I mentioned before, there are so many approaches taken by the athlete in general. So overall, the sport actually provides like a different like mindset where winning competition does not always mean being in first place gold medal position. It can be for like people who are naturally gifted and are trying to achieve top of the podium as one of the ways to earn next level. While for others, winning can be different. Winning can be defined differently in both physical and mental aspect and how someone approaches it. To be a winner can also mean having great sportsmanship, showing respect to your opponents, and having pride, integrity, and determination on be able to establishing your growth within character. And then mentally, mentally a person can lose in a team competition, but he or she have to ask himself a question at the end of the day: Did I do good? I believe I did the best of my ability to contribute to the team, and that will be all that matters. So, what is the biggest goal for throwers? Plain and simple: throw well, throw far. So, like, there's no better feeling in the world than having to improve personal best, especially for strength sports like shot put and discus. In throwing event, it does take a lot of intensive strength conditioning as well as a lot of technical practices, which both are essential to perform one good throw out of the 4 to 6 attempts. But it isn't really always the case. So when it comes to like all sports, even track and field have to deal with certain barriers that actually apply to the athletes. So the first set of barrier would be lacking time due to busy schedule. We're all busy, especially as student athlete. It takes a lot out of them when it comes to like getting involved with school, having time for practice, as well as having a job to meet the financial needs. Time management, pretty much everyone's good as enemy, not because everyone has time to do things that they actually want to do. And then the second barrier would be no access to fitness facilities to meet personal needs. So when it comes to being like doing financial needs, which is why everyone has a part-time job, so they can be able to afford things that they actually want to do and what they want to get. For example, gym memberships. And when gym memberships aren't really available for the student athletes, sometimes they have to turn to looking at weight rooms and fitness facilities applied to their sport. This is very common for track and field athletes having no access to fitness facilities because the weight room fitness centers on campus would be taken over by other sports for their off-season training, where it is needed the most for the in-season training. Therefore, coaches have to come up with ways to find alternatives to help athletes meet the needs to be able to perform. The third barrier would have to be unrealistic goals established that are unachievable. Because oftentimes people like to think ahead of what they want to do and what they want to achieve, which is a good thing. Although the biggest con about it is that they expect as a result to happen right away and affects them mentally because they get stressed out easily about why they're not achieving their perfect goals. And then, of course, we have physical limitation, which is the next barrier applied to throwers. This is super, super, super common within the throwing group. Yes, very diverse, but oftentimes there are athletes who join the sport from other sports due to injuries. So, like for example, soccer players have their career cut short due to ACL surgeries. You got football players with bad backs and volleyball players with bad ankles, and they'll be coming into the sport because they want to feel that they have something, they want to be able to do something that would be able to help them overcome their physical limitation. So therefore, the job as coaches is to be developing a prevention program for the workouts, while at the same time keeping it consistent with everyone else to ensure that everyone is putting in as much work as possible. And of course, we also got the lack of social support. So as we know, the throwing group is not very popular despite being the group that actually puts many points on the board for the team. Social support is needed for the throwers to have enough positive energy to be able to do well. Without those, their performances would decrease both on the physical and, of course, the emotional level. So today we're going to be discussing about how the author's research actually is being important, especially when it comes to talking about certain factors that would be able to affect the performance. So this article, according to Bali, definitely goes into further details about factors associated with performance and exercise. The most common ones are definitely competition anxiety as well as depression, which both can actually be a result of dealing with stress. Of course, there are positive and negative outcomes that talks about how competition anxiety does take its effects. There are also strategies involved about what to do to overcome these barriers, where it would be involved visualizing the game and the opponents, basically setting up realistic goals by making a checklist on what to do to get there, and setting up your mantra, which we're going to be talking about later in this presentation. And then you also got to visualize yourself on your own physical capabilities, which is also a factor where you would have to tell yourself it's only you and your only competition is yourself. This article further explained about what techniques are suitable and applicable to deal with competition anxiety, and then taking advantage of it to your own use in the sport. And then we got the second source, which for this article by Hajjera et al. It goes into further descriptive details about how reality affects student athletes, especially on a college level. One of the biggest factors that would affect performance would definitely be depression, as the article pretty much states. Basically have to ask, did the athlete get enough sleep? Is he or she eating well? Are they mentally exhausted from school and work? Life as a student athlete can take a toll on both high school and collegiate levels when it comes to dealing with many responsibilities to get through the day, and the athlete could have 6:30 a.m. workout sessions in the weight room before moving on to class starting at 9 a.m. until the afternoon. And then the athlete will have a 2 to 3 hour practice session with the sport that they are participating in before moving on to a part-time or potentially full-time like night shifts for the day job. When the barrier often takes its toll, this article further explains how depression would become a mild to severe mood disorder that is likely able to lead to mental illness. So, especially when in competition, there are many athletes who are likely to set up goals from what they want to achieve. So, therefore, for example, when California, winning a certain division championship within a certain section is actually a really big deal because you still get there in a ring and you get a banner in the gym. If the goal is not achieved, it is likely to have a major setback mentally that the athlete does not want to continue. Even if he or she qualified for the sectional masters competition along the way and try to be able to achieve going to state level competition. Certain ways to overcome depression, not only exercise, but also having social support, according to this article, as well as to be able to help with depression and helplessness. Therefore, the article describes how social support could include being with friends, classmates, taking advice, counselors, instructors, and so forth. And then the third article they're going to be discussing by Locke and Latham. This article pretty much talked about the application about how goal setting in sport can become a huge factor when in life, whether in school, participating in sports, working at a job of a related field. It is important to set up a checklist of goals based on what you want to achieve. If a student athlete wants to become a California sectional division champion, this can be seen as a long-term goal, especially if the athlete is a high school freshman and has 4 years to make it happen. This article talks about how there should be a series of short-term goals displayed that can facilitate the achievement for this particular long-term goal. Short-term goal that applies could be to get stronger, faster in the weight room, increasing numbers in the lifts such as the bench press, deadlift, and also setting up time for the speed, like speed ladder or sprints, According to the article, setting these short-term goals will definitely attain long-term goal performance, as well as improving performance with the increased difficulty of the task at hand. So now we're going to be talking about the factors that actually affect performance. Having goals is awesome. Having the integrity, the will, the determination, awesome. But like all sports, track and field is not without factors that would affect performance. So the 4 main factors that we're going to be discussing would be environmental, stress and pressure, performance anxiety, as well as depression. So now looking at the first factor that we're going to talk about is the environmental factor. A lot of sports have environmental conditions that affect them, but not as much as track and field due to being like an outdoor sport and dealing with like different weather conditions. Depending on the geographical region or maybe the time of the year, hot and humid weather conditions over 80 degrees and so forth can hinder performance by making the athlete dehydrated at a quicker rate, both at practice and at competitions. There can be series of fatigue that affect them physically and mentally. Physically, they can easily suffer through cramps if they don't drink enough water. Mentally, they'll be throwing in question the negative self-talk at them, like, why am I even here? What's the point? That kind of thing. And then when it comes to cold environment is no different, especially when it comes to wearing like proper attire for to counteract within these weather conditions, both heat and the cold weathers. Not wearing proper attire to counter the weather and staying warm will likely lead the athlete to sickness such as the cold and the flu during cold weather conditions. So to overcome the environmental barrier, my bad. To overcome the environmental barrier, communication between the coaches and the athletes play a key role into knowing what's coming up about what is coming up. Such as the weather condition, itineraries being developed, as well as having pep talks with the athletes. This can be done during pre-meeting the day before competitions, before or after practice to discuss what practice will look like and what practice will look like, and post-competition meeting to talk about the results as well as what is coming up. As coaches, we have no control about what the athlete does and or can do, but because everyone is different. The best that we can do as coaches is simply provide guidelines and encouragement to the athlete to be able to do something relating to environmental conditions and something to be able to help improve their own well-being. So the next factor covered would be stress and pressure, which is a psychological factor involving how the athletes are when at practice and at the competitions. Stress that the athletes go through is often caused by unrealistic goal settings when it comes to competitions like regionals. They'll say stuff like, I'm going to break that school record next week, when the school record is often many marks above them, and their current physical capabilities will not be able to allow it because they're not really that developed enough to actually be able to make that mark happen. Therefore, the unrealistic goals would mess them up mentally, and they would have to be when they would be expecting those results like right away. Then the athletes would be pressured by the coaches. Sometimes the athletes are being too dependent to be able to help score points for the team and making top three, obviously. When many on the team are not performing well, sometimes coaches will often get into a bad habit of relying on that one athlete to be able to help the team. And they'll apply like a lot of stress and pressure to where the athlete really needs to help score points for the team, make the top three, and then at the same time be able to help, at some way trying to be able to help like show some contributions for this team. So like having a lot of stress and pressure can affect performance because when that happens, the athletes are not going to be able to be mentally at their best to be able to perform. So overcoming stress and pressure, we obviously got every coach got to know that everyone is involved, not just one athlete. So the strategy that may likely help relieve the stress and pressure of the athletes for the coaches to help the athletes set up their mantra, as well as setting up a routine to be able to help relieve their stress. What kind of music do they play? What the warm-up routine needs to be done. Therefore, the athletes setting up a mantra is generally a positive statement or phrase to affirm the way that the athlete wants to succeed, such as achieving training goals or any other accomplishment within life. So during training, mantras help strengthen their mental game by keeping them motivated before any competition to help build strength and confidence, as well as getting the positive energy flowing. And of course, we also got setting up short-term goals, with basically making a checklist to accomplish the long-term goals. So just be realistic, as long as being able to make sure that the goals are a bit challenging, so that people are not preferring the easiest way out. Just focusing on something that's to be able to challenge them, motivate them to be able to do a lot better. So then the third factor that we're going to be talking about would be performance anxiety. Anxiety on performance is very common, especially when there's like a strong sensation of having like butterflies within your stomach. Like, it's your first time competing, or there's basically too many thoughts going through your head. You're pretty much going to be overthinking about the goal that you're going to be trying to accomplish. So, just like stress and pressure, there's a series of adrenaline, as I mentioned, rushing through your body, where mentally you cannot think straight, as if you're about to have like a panic attack, especially when it comes to like overthinking about goals that you're trying to accomplish, as I mentioned. So, the reason for this factor is because it is psychological, but it's also situational, to where during practice, athletes are having amazing week of training, making great development for the training, and then when it comes to competition, the situation is different. So for it being like a first time competing, it could affect them mentally, the fact that maybe they're not really used to performing in front of like large crowds. So often when athletes perform at practice, they're giving out their 75, 80% effort, trying to keep it consistent as they go, developing the techniques is awesome. And then when it comes to competition, when they have to go like a full 100%, it actually goes without them being dependent on technique, therefore their physical performance will be off balance. So the strategy to overcome this, especially for throwers, would be to establish a plan of how they're going to be approaching the sport. So, for example, establishing a motto. So for throwers, the motto is always going to be first throw, fair throw, where they allow themselves to go 80% effort on the first ever throwing attempt out of the 4 attempts. And then once the marks is made and they're satisfied with it, they can go on to 85% and so forth to keep the series rolling. Other ways can be building self-confidence. Track and field is a team sport, whereas the team, we are often reliant on one another. We help each other out, we support each other no matter what, and definitely be able to try to get the positive energy going to make sure the person actually is on the right track and make sure they're performing really well. So when you actually have like teammates that are there to support you along with your friends and family, it definitely helps build your confidence when it comes to doing the competitions. So this also includes like, recognizing your feelings as well as the sensation, which involves like, what you were thinking. And as I mentioned in the last slide, getting butterfly sensation across your body. All it takes is simply just taking a deep breath. All right, breathe, calm the mind, think positive thoughts. Give yourself some positive self-talks about how practice and competition will go. And then lastly, think about, if you're ever thinking about like worst case scenarios, right, which is very common, always replace it with certain phrases such as, I'm going to be okay. The fourth and final factor that affects performance would be depression. It is a combination of situational and psychological factor, which is likely to result from stress, pressure, as well as anxiety. Depression can come from the result of unrealistic and unattainable goals set by the coaches and to the athletes, especially when at the big meet, the coaches make a bad habit of telling the athletes that to win, they need to hit a certain mark to take first place, which of course will lead to being pressured and the goal is not achieved, which would bring down their own self-worth. The athletes would then be reflecting their self-worth, including their self-efficacy as well as self-esteem, and they would be comparing themselves to other people, whether they're on the same team or on the opposing team. The result of this would end up them questioning themselves to see whether or not they're actually worth it. And oftentimes it can lead to athletes not wanting to do the sport anymore, which is definitely a bad thing. So to overcome depression, we always have to create a really positive environment that helps the athlete to be able to do well. So the strategy that will apply to the athletes would be positive self-talks that will be able to enable them to do well. Nobody likes to be brought down, and the job as coaches is to ensure that the athletes are able to do well and achieve the best of their abilities to be able to actually do well and perform for the sport. And you have to talk about positive self-talks all the time, but it's definitely plays a key role within the sport. So the other strategy would be establishing realistic goals that is attainable yet still challenging as a motivator to where the athlete can still achieve that goal. This can serve as a motivator to help athletes develop certain motivation for these goals as they are able to see the benefit that will enable them to keep on going. And then last but not least, we also got moral support. Friends, families, teammates are always going to be there to give encouragement and bring positive energy, therefore telling the athlete that they're actually not alone. So regarding faith integration, there are definitely 2 Bible verses that definitely helps when it comes to strengthen mentality, as well as be able to, like, overcome certain barriers within the sport. So the first verse I like to talk about would be Philippians 4:13. And I always love this verse because it actually states, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. And what I like about this verse is that whenever I'm by myself and then I'm actually competing in a sport and I got no support whatsoever, I look to God for support, and I know that God's actually with me to help me overcome certain obstacles, certain barriers, to make sure that my goals are achievable. And then you have Psalms 103:24, which states, for praise the Lord, my soul, and not forget all of his benefits, who forgives all your sins and heals all your disease and redeems you and lifts you from the pit and crowns you with love and compassion. I love this quote because the fact that at the end of the day, you've done all the work, everything is all good, and then by time, even if performances don't really go out the way that you want them to, you did the best of your ability to be able to make it happen. And at the same time, you always got to question yourself. You always got to tell yourself, I did good. I did the best of my ability. Now it's time to improve and move forward. All right. So the biggest recommendation for coaches when working with student athletes is to help them establish their goal setting that will enable them to make a checklist on the short-term goals that eventually lead up to a long-term goal. So, like, for example, if someone wants to be a champion, you know, they can actually, like, talk about, okay, what's it going to take to become a champion? Get stronger, work on your techniques, go faster, maintain a healthier food diet that be able to help you, they'll all be able to help contribute to that long-term set goal. Coaches should also help student athletes set up their mantra about what those goals are. Is technique the biggest focus? What part of that technique needs to be focused on in order to perfect the whole thing? For throwers, it would be building strong tension in the lower body to establish an explosive lift upon that finish. So if the goal of the competition is using the lower body more, then that would be the first short-term goal for the sport, whether in a competition or at practice. Also, another recommendation would be to establish positive feedback for the throwers so that they can have positive reinforcements and have bigger strive to do better. Thus, this will allow them to raise their own self-worth as well as improving their self-confidence and their self-esteem. These recommendations are something to think about when it comes to establishing a plan. Every coach has a plan or a vision on how they want the athlete to succeed, as well as being able to provide what is needed for the athletes and be able to help them achieve next level status. Especially in the throwing group, the athletes in the throwing group are actually very diverse, coming from different sport. Each have their own goal, and the one major thing that I learned from this course would be involving an established plan to help the athletes be able to do well. It helps keep an open mind within the world of health and fitness, that everyone has their own personal goals, barriers, and their own mantra about how they actually approach the sport, but not just sport, but also fitness as a whole. This applies to my career because of being a collegiate and high school coach, as well as being able to work with clients and student athletes who are looking to do better. And it helps me be able to help them establish a foundation for the pathway to success. And that is it. So if you guys got any questions, comment, concern, please let me know right away. I'd be happy to discuss them with you in any way possible. Above all, hope everyone's having a great day. And adios.